What do you guys think? All right. So we are live. Okay, so today we'll basically go over, what's left of the grammatical cases. Well, the ergative, the dative, and then we'll look at the verbs, the imperfective, and then a few other things so that we can, starting from, the next class, take on real tablets. So we're almost there. I know I say it every lesson, but this one is the right time. Okay, so let's start. So I have already hinted to this in the homework, but I haven't really explained it yet, so I'll do it now. So we have seen how to say, how to express dimensional concepts like I am in a place, I am with someone, I am like someone. You have to use, grammatical cases, the locative, the comitative, and so on and so forth. But we haven't seen how to say for someone, that is expressing the beneficiary. So, never mind. Okay, that was quite a fail. Never mind. We're going to talk about the genitive first. Okay, never mind. So, not how to say for someone, but of someone. So, how to express grammatical ownership. So, this is, I guess, the most important grammatical case because it happens, you see it a lot, even in English, we use a lot of s like and ofs, so it's quite common. And the thing is, it looks really similar to the locative, so sometimes you have to look out. So what is the ending of it? It's arc. Now I have put the k inside of parentheses because, well, it almost never appears. Now we'll see why in the next lesson, but basically there is always the a and very rarely the k. Again, we'll see how and why. So how do you form, constructions with the genitive? Like follows. The possessor is specified after the possessed. So if we have x, y, and then ak, it would be the x of y. So the possessed x of y is again after the possessed. So, like most cases that end in a vowel, the arc, or better stated, the a, since the k again never appears, not in these cases, is repeated after, is present after the repeated consonant. So if you have mu, which means name, which is the possessed, and then you have the possessor, which is lugal, king, which ends in a consonant, then you have the consonant again, and then you have the vowel, which is again a. So mu, lugal la, the name of the king. Mu, again, the possessed, so x, lugal, king, and then the arc. Now, how is the arc written? La, because it's the last consonant of the noun, and then you have the a from the arc without the k, which in this case does not appear. Now, that would be the easy part. Well, we have another example here. So a, to, which means house or temple, and then enlil, which is again a god. Enlila, just like lugal, it ends in a l sound. So we have the la at the end, which is again after the possessor, and it just repeats the last consonant. So yeah, I put it into brackets like this, a and lil, a. I put in the k, although it's not present in the writing. Again, not really relevant right now, but will come in handy in the next class. Now, what happens when you do not have a consonant at the end? Usually nothing. Usually you just have the possessed and then the possessor without anything after them. So we have mu, which is again name, and ugula, which is the overseer. So again, mu ugula without anything, because again, it ends in a vowel, means the name of the overseer. So the genitive is there, but it's supposed, I guess. It's not written. However, in the analysis, I tend to just put it inside of brackets, just to show that there is a genitive relationship within the two terms. So one is, again, possessed first, and then we have the possessor. Same thing with edumu, so the house of the sun. Etu, house or temple, and then dumu, son, which ends again in u. So no genitive at the end. Sometimes what happens is they would reduplicate the vowel, so you would have a dumu u and mu ugula a, but that unfortunately is up to the scribe. And well, there was no singular scribal tradition in Mesopotamia, so it depends basically on where the tablet was written and where the scribe is from. So yeah, I would move on. So now we can finally talk about the dative. So I tell it to you, or I do it for you. So in English, the two, well, prepositions that the dative goes explaining are to and for. So again, the beneficiary, which we also call the indirect object, or the dative indirect object, because in English it is introduced by, well, a preposition. That's why we can also call it the prepositional dative object. So the ending of the dative is usually ra. So ra, it's written like this. And so we have an example here, lugal again, which means king, lugal ra, for the king, plain and simple. However, because it's Sumerian, things are never plain and simple. So when a word ends in a vowel, in this case, we have a word, dumu, which does end in a vowel, and then we have ni, which is part of the possessive suffixes, which means his, which also ends in a vowel. Then we see something happening to the dative. It kind of contracts. So what happens when you have a word that ends in a vowel, or a construction that ends in a vowel, is that the a of the ra gets elided, and what you're left with is just the r. So in this case, dumu, son, dumu ni, his son, dumu ni ear. The ear is basically the r from the dative ra and the e from, well, ni. I think we have a question in the chat. What about dumbra? What do you mean dumbra? Oh, dumu not. Dumu. Oh, sorry. Okay. So when you have, if you just had dumu and then ra, it would probably be written dumu and then ur. So again, the vowel and then the r. So the rule of thumb is, if it ends in a vowel, if the noun ends in a vowel, you take away the a, and you are left with vowel and then an r. So again, if it were dumu ra, it would probably be written as dumu ur. So vowel r. Is it clear now?
Yes, perfect. And my old nemesis autocorrect. So of course, dumu came out as dumb the moment you hit the return button. So yep.
Yeah, I couldn't tell whether it was a joke or real question, but yeah. All right. So here's the catch, though. You can only use the dative case with person class beneficiaries. So you can say to Aurelio, you can say for his son, you can say for the king, but you cannot say, I don't know, for the house, using the dative. So you cannot use the ra. You have to, well, resort to something else. which is, never mind, wrong way. Okay, the directive, which is another grammatical case. So what is the directive? It serves, well, two purposes. To express non-person class beneficiaries, so for the house, to the temple, towards the house, those sort of things. And it also so happens to be called the terminative locative because it has a twofold function. Its ending is a, so very much different from dative ra. And so let's see what the two functions are. The first is to express direction. So basically the beneficiary of the sentence. To cool means gun. Sorry, yeah, weapon, no gun. Ngish is the determinative for wooden objects. So to cool, again, weapon. To cool for or to the weapon. So just like the dative, but again, weapons are not alive, so they do not belong to the person class. Zabar, which means copper. Zabarre, with the E at the end, for or to the copper. Now again, like it always happens when grammatical cases are composed of a single vowel, in the writing you have the repeated consonant before the vowel itself. So tukul le, zabar re. So there's that. And the second function is similar, I guess, more similar to a locative. That's why it's called the terminative locative. It's used to express proximity. So while the locative, I guess, expresses the exact position where you are located. I am in the house, I am in Uruk, God knows where I am. The directive in its locative function expresses, well, proximity. So I am not in the house, I am close to the house, by the house, around the house. So all those kind of concepts of proximity, I guess. Yeah, I can't find another better word to describe it. So kar, which means port, harbor. Kar e, by the harbor, close to the harbor, on the harbor. Kur, which is mountain. Kurre, by the mountains. Or mountain, again, no plurals, and with no person class nouns, they're indistinguishable. So kurre, on the mountain, by the mountain, not inside of the mountain. You would use the locative for that. Again, so yeah. Again, it's a. Oopsie. Some people like to call it determinative locative. Some others call it directive. Some very weird people call it the directive terminative locative. And you can call it whatever you want, as long as it doesn't take 10 minutes to pronounce. And yeah, but in Sumerology, whatever sounds the fanciest kind of wins all the time. So get creative. And I think, yeah, we can move on to something more controversial, I guess. That's why I call it the eternal dispute. I really wanted to include like pictures of like the most renowned Sumerologists fighting each other, but I guess that was not a good idea. But why is that? Because it's one of the areas of Sumerian grammar where we have the least consensus among Sumerologists. So some Sumerologists say Sumerian does not have adjectives. It has verbs that are used adjectively. Like, I don't know, in English, you can say, I don't know, we have adjectives. So I guess you can say, the rose is red. Well, in Sumerian, that works a little differently. You would say the rose is being read. The rose is redding. And that is, again, because Sumerian does, often relating to length and size, and a lot of verbs. So what is the case?
Maybe it was just me, but at least I lost you
No.
for a moment.
Yeah, I lost you.
Could we repeat maybe the you said adjective
Ooh.
verbs and you had the rose example and then you broke off. Can we start there again?
Okay, yeah, sure. Is it good now?
Yeah, now you're good again. I think it was just a network. You were suddenly frozen.
No problem. So I was saying, well, in English you would say the rose is red, red being an adjective. In Sumerian you would say the rose is redding, the rose is being red, because again, having no real adjectives, you would have to require, to kind of employ a verb in some form. So does Sumerian really have adjectives, or does it not? Well, that depends on the literature you're reading. I tend to go with the notion that Sumerian has some adjectives, but a lot of verbs used adjectively. So how do you turn, so to say, a verb into an adjective? You take the verb and then you add a suffix to it. The suffix is a. So for example, the verb zid, which means to be right. Zida, written zida. Right, or well, since it's a verb, being right. Zid, Shag 5 is to be sweet. Shaga, sweet, or well, being sweet. Really just shag a. Again, since it's a vowel, you usually get, the duplicated consonant at the end. Sometimes you don't, but again, in most cases you do. Like here, shag 5, ga. The G again is part of the shag. While for some reason, some verbs, which again, since they do not take the suffix a, they might be real adjectives. They just do not take any suffix. For example, gal means big, and you do not need to add any suffix to it. So gal by itself means to be big, but also big without the need for a suffix. But it's never really used as a verb, so mostly just appears as an adjective. Same thing for mach, which means great. You don't need to add anything to it, no suffix a. So they are hardly ever used as verbs. So we could say they were once maybe productive verbs, which then really became unproductive as verbs, and they were, well, they became adjectives of that. They are kind of frozen, like frozen forms of adjectives of old, and to which you do not add any ending. So yeah, in this course, I guess we will treat them as adjectives when they are used as adjectives. So if a verb is used as an adjective, then we will call it an adjective. So what is basically an adjective? It's a verb used adjectively. All right. Now, let's go on to something fairly more interesting, I guess. How do you mark the subject and the object? Because so far we have seen all sorts of grammatical cases apart from those. We have a question in the chat. Maybe I have missed in some lesson, but is there a to be verb? Yes, there is. Now, it's not entirely popular. It doesn't appear a lot. That's why it's not part of the classes yet, but it's going to appear in this week, well, next week's homework. But yes, Sumerian does have a verb to be, and it does have, it can be used as, well, dependently on the noun as a suffix, or independently as a real self-standing verb. But yes, that will be part of the next homework, and I will be explaining that in the next lesson. But thank you for asking. Yes, Sumerian does indeed have a verb to be, which is quite prolific and active, unlike Akkadian and other languages. So thank you for the question. So back to the topic. So how do you mark the subject and the direct object of a sentence? So we know that Sumerian is a SOV language. That means subject, object, verb. So the object usually goes at the end. Sorry, the verb usually goes at the end. And what comes right before the object, sorry, right before the verb, is the object. I don't know why I'm so fixated with the object this time. So that's why, I mean, how you kind of distinguish between the object and the verb and the subject by just knowing the rough position in the sentence. But now we'll see how do you determine that, like what is the object, what is the verb, and what is the adjective, the subject of the sentence with maximal accuracy. So the direct object is never marked. However, it's never marked as in it doesn't get a real case at the end. It doesn't get a vowel, it doesn't get a syllable of any kind, doesn't get really anything. That's why we mark it with a 0 or with a O, with a thing in the middle. Yeah, I hear someone around. No problem. So yeah, and how do you tell which part of the sentence is the direct object, the accusative object, so to say? Two things. First of all, it comes right before the verb usually. So you have nga, which means I, me. Then you have e, which is again temple, and then you have the verb. You know that the object comes right before the verb, so you know that the temple has to be the object. And well, another way of determining which part of the sentence the object is by looking at, well, endings, because there can be only one object in a sentence, and all the other cases are marked by, grammatical cases that have a distinct ending. So a, da, ging, ak, a, e, while the object doesn't have anything. So you see something like a stray complement that doesn't really have anything, and it comes right before the verb, and you're like, okay, that has to be the poor direct object. So yeah, again, we mark it with 0 or the Norwegian or Icelandic O, because it looks really cool. So nga, me, e, with the 0, because again, no real ending. Object, the temple, mu, do, I built, with the 0 in between, because again, the first person doesn't take a prefix. Lu, men, mu, ungas. What is remarkable here? We do not really have a subject. We only have something that comes right before the object, which doesn't end in any case. And then we have a verb. And we also know that the object is in the third person because it has the N. So he, or well, she, unwritten, kills the man, which is Lu. That's why Lu is again written with the 0 complement. So that would be the object. Now, still talking about the object. So I think we have seen this already. This is the direct object, which from now on I'm just going to write as DO, is never introduced by any, again, grammatical case. So it ends in a 0, and while the others are like so-called prepositional objects, and they are always introduced, I mean, in English, with, again, a preposition, and in Sumerian by, a grammatical case that isn't the absolutive. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you. The absence of case, basically, because the accusative, so to say, is not a case as much as the lack thereof. is called the absolutive. So the object is always marked by the absolutive case. That's how we call it. So while the absolutive, well, direct object is never introduced by a suffix, the indirect objects are. So kur she, for example, he went to the mountains. Mungan, gan meaning to go. And lil da, with and lil. And an na tum, worthy of. Why do I say this? Because in Sumerian, some verbs do not take a direct object. So sometimes you end up having a indirect or prepositional object where you would expect, a direct object in English. And why is that, again, relevant? Now we'll see. Because we're going to talk about the subject. So in Sumerian, the subject is marked by e. Now, if you remember, we have just seen a case that ends in e. That would be the directive or terminative locative. Now, there are theories according to which the two cases went developing from one single case, but we're not going to delve into that now. Just know that they both end in an e, but again, the subject is usually the first thing, the first element of a sentence, while everything else just follows. So it's actually really hard in context to confuse the two. So don't worry about that. What is the catch with the subject, with the e, which we call the ergative case? It is only used if the sentence is transitive. So what does that mean? Only if we have a transitive verb. A transitive verb is a verb that takes a direct object. So an object in the absolutive. If the object is not a direct object, so if the sentence is not transitive, it is going to take an indirect object. However, we only mark the subject by e if the sentence is transitive. So if we have an object. So let's see a couple of examples. Lugale e mundu. So Lugal would be the subject, the king. And then what do we have? We have an object, a temple. And then we have the verb, mundu, he built. Lugal e. Why do we have the e, the ergative e? Because we have the direct object. If we didn't have it, if we had the king is in the temple, then the king would not be marked by the ergative. Let's see another example. Dingir, which means, again, God. Dingir e, so we know it's the subject of a transitive sentence. Lu, the man, muungats, has killed. So the God killed the man. Now, I'm sorry if the examples always sound redundant, and I always use the same verbs. I can assure you Sumerian literature is far more interesting than this, and we will not be talking about murder and everything. But I just use these two verbs, to kill and to build, for all my examples, because they are very straightforward. So yes, this case is called, again, the ergative, and it's always marked by e, only when the sentence is transitive, so when the verb takes a direct object. What if it doesn't take a direct object? Then you don't mark the subject with anything, just like the direct object. So you just mark it with 0, aka the absolutive case. So basically, you can use the absolutive case to mark the object of a transitive sentence or the subject of an intransitive sentence. Let's see a couple of examples again. Lugal, which is, again, king. Uri, which means well, it's the city of Urim or Ur, Urishe, towards Ur. So we see that since it's got a she, which is the terminative case, which is again movement towards a place, which again happens to be a prepositional or indirect object, we cannot understand this sentence as a transitive sentence. This is intransitive. So again, the subject is not marked by anything. That's why we have the zero after it. Mu, again, we have nothing, we have no n, because again, we only use the n, again, when the verb in the third person is transitive. Otherwise, we have to follow the intransitive conjugation. It doesn't take the n. Let's see another example. Ane, which means he. Zada, with you. Za is you, and da is with. Mungen, he went with you. Ane is not marked by anything. Why? Because the object is introduced by, well, a case that isn't the absolutive. So it's a intransitive sentence. Okay, this is a summary of what we have just talked about. So if the verb is transitive, so it has a direct object, the subject is marked by E, which is the ergative case, and the direct object, the DO, is marked by 0, the absolutive. While if the subject is, sorry, if the verb is intransitive, so if the sentence does not have a direct object, does not have a DO, the subject is not marked by anything, so by the 0, by the absolutive. While again, the object appears in, it can happen in any case, any oblique prepositional, how to say, case, locative, the genitive, the pomentative, and so on and so forth, the terminative, etc., etc. Good. So now we're going to talk about verbs. I think I have included, yes. So this is what we did last time. So I wanted to go through this again. So this would be the perfective or hamtive, the past tense, the action that is done for the completed action in the past, which has its own conjugation. By the way, the verb ak can be spelled both aka and ak. That's why it appears two ways, but I will get rid of the last aka because the a because it's confusing. So we have seen that the conjugation is nothing before the verb in the first person. We have a vowel before the second person, which is usually a e, the n for the third person, and a b for the third person object class. And then for the plural, you just add enden, enzen, and then depending on the class, you add a esh to the n, and you get the third person, or you just, it takes the b and it doesn't change for the non-object class. So this would be the perfective transitive conjugation. We will see the intransitive in a moment, but it's simpler, so don't worry about it. So the thing is, verbs usually, when they are conjugated not in the perfective, but rather in the imperfective, in the maro, so the present ongoing action form, they usually undergo different changes. Sometimes they also stay the same, but some of them undergo some sort of change. And the perfective, so the other conjugation, it basically just uses different prefixes. So it's like learning, I don't know, conjugations in whatever language. It changes depending on the past or so grammatical tense. So in Italian, you have different endings for the past and the future. Same thing in Sumerian, you have different suffixes and prefixes. So once you master them, and they're not really hard, you can read most verbs in Sumerian. And verbs are basically classified on the base of how they change from perfective to imperfective. So now we're going to see what changes they can undergo. So some verbs, and lucky for you, that goes for maybe 70% of all verbs, do not change. So you have do 3, which means to build, or well, to have built in the perfective, and it remains do 3, to be building in the perfective, in the imperfective, sorry. Some verbs have a totally different appearance. So we say that they replace their base. The base is basically the verb itself. So duk 4, to have said in the perfective. E, to be saying. So you see how that totally changes? That's hard to confuse. Some verbs undergo reduplication. So what does that mean? The verb happens twice, basically. So ngar, which means to have placed. Nga. Sounds really stupid in my opinion, but there you have it. The thing about reduplication is that it's never total. You see how the verb kind of loses the last R, so it becomes nga. It's always like this. It always loses its last consonant if it has one, and it usually does. So, and the last category would be the verb that get the suffix ed. Now the D, just like the K in the arc genitive, never appears basically in the form itself. So dien, which means to have built, just like do, there's basically synonyms, more or less. Dime, which again takes the E from ed, to be building. So you see that's 4 different, categories you have to account for, and they're not very, 70% of the verbs just belong to the first one, so no real change. So you just have to look at the prefixes and the suffixes, and you say, oh, well, this verb is clearly in the hamto or in the maro, so in the perfective or imperfective. The other ones, you can still look at the prefixes and suffixes, but you also have another hint to see that, in what form, in what tense the verb is, which is, okay, this verb looks really different from its, counterpart in the other tense. So that has to be in a certain tense. Or maybe if the verb sounds really stupid, it's usually, it belongs to this class. They all sound really weird. And trust me, they do. So nganga, ngigi, kuku, they sound very childish to an English speaker, I would say. And that's also a very clear indication of, imperfectivity. And then these ones are maybe the hardest to spot, but we will grow accustomed to, I guess. We have no other way. So let's move on. This would be the very easy conjugation chart. So the transitive imperfective, so the present, future, again, ongoing action, either right now or in some hypothetical future. We see that it's got a N at the end. This time, you see, in the other conjugation, you usually put something before. Now you put something after, Iak N. So you put N and N. Then you put E for the third person. Again, there is no difference between the object class and the person class. It's all E. And then the other ones look really just like their counterpart in the perfective. So you just add anden and ensen. Sometimes you have an E. I don't think that's accurate, but sometimes you do. But essentially, they just look the same. So when you have like this, like enden, and well, enden here, how do you tell them apart? Well, looking at the base. So the suffixes are the same, but the base is usually different. Sometimes it isn't, though, when it's part of the no change class. So then you just have to guess by context, basically. And the third person is just ene, or ne, if the verb starts in a vowel. Now I think I have Oh yeah, and what about, well, the intransitive conjugation? It remains the same. It doesn't change from transitive, sorry, it's from perfective to imperfective. So it's one less thing to, well, be worried about. Just, just like the other one. So n, nothing, nothing, enden, ensen, esh. If you have already studied, the material from the last class, then there is no need to study anything else. It's the exact same. So here we have a comparison of the two. So this would be the imperfective. So the ongoing action. You see, you add something after the base. Well, here you add something before the base. You can basically just use this one slide for your study, I guess. This is the clearest, I guess, slide. You can kind of visualize the whole of Sumerian verbs with this. So I don't know about you, but I don't think it's too hard. It's quite straightforward. And yeah, we'll get plenty of practice after this too. So yeah, this was the most complicated topic of the class too. So if you manage to get the verbs right, oh boy, you're halfway through. So the last thing we're going to talk about, I think, is vowel hierarchy. So what does that mean? Well, in Sumerian, unfortunately, not all vowels are created equal. And what does that mean? Some vowels are stronger than others. That's why some prevail in some contexts over others. So we'll see them. So U would be the strongest vowel. So sometimes when you have a suffix like a or e, a grammatical case, they change to U. And you, not you, but you, the vowel. If the word again ends in U. So we'll see about this. We haven't seen the copula, the verb to be yet, but the verb to be in the third person would be So with the initial a. And we have lugal tsu, which means your king, which ends in u. So the copula since it's put right after the u, lugal tsu u, the m is lost and the a becomes u. So let's see a few other examples yet. E instead, it is the weakest vowel. If it gets suffixes like a or a, usually a though. Let me see though. Oh yeah, okay. So if you add a to e, sometimes it will change, sometimes it will not. But in the writing, it usually stays the same. However, there are cases where you have e after an I. And again, since e sometimes happens to be the weakest vowel, it gets elided, and instead you get an e. So let's see. Dingir Ani. So again, Dingir Ani is God. But since it's the subject of the sentence, you have to add the e. So what happens is the I gets elided and you get the e instead. So Dingirane. So sometimes you have to switcheroo. You get ne where you should be getting e and then an a. Because again, e is the weakest vowel of the bunch. I think I repeated this. Yeah. I made a repetition in the slides, I think. Yes. And well, again, since E is again the weakest vowel, any other vowel wins against it, so to say. So ki means land, and in his land would be ki, ani, his land, and then the a of the locative, which again becomes ki na. The na being ani without the a because ki starts in a vowel, and then you get the I gets elided and you get an a. So ki ani I a becomes just ki na. So that's why some forms look really weird. And I think that is it for the class. Now yeah, never mind, we still have a. So yeah, a is the second weakest vowel. And if a word ends in a vowel that isn't a, sometimes the suffix a is not added. So la means to wait, and he will wait. We go back and look at the chart here with the conjugation. He will, so third person, maru, imperfective, future form. It gets a final a at the end. So this comes especially useful when you have verbs in the future form that, are conjugated in the third person and they end in a vowel. You only get I, la, he will wait, because the last a at the end sometimes gets elided. So I, la, without the a. Why? Because a wins against e. Yeah, not always, depends on the scribe, but usually it does. Same thing here. The man will kill his son. The subject is lu, man. And since it's the subject of a transitive sentence, it's supposed to get a suffixed. But since it ends in a strong, cool vowel, it doesn't. So it just looks, ungrammatical, but it's actually just how the writing and probably phonetics in Sumerian work. Same thing in the land, usually, using the directive. He, a. The a gets elided. Now this should be like on the land, close to the land, by the land, but it's basically a locative. So the a is not put after the e because they are both weak vowels, and sometimes even the a sound loses against the e. So yeah, I think that was it. Now I have included this, which is a list of pronouns that are used in Sumerian. So ngae, the first person, I, you, he, we, and they. But they are really mnemonic. We can go through them. They're really easy, I guess. So they are pronounced as follows in the first column, and they are written, and we have them here. Now, what's interesting is that they usually have a thematic consonant. So the first person has nga, so ngae, or nge, depends on how it's written. There you have the cuneiform. Then you have the second person that usually ends in a zad. I mean, the thematic consonant is zad. The third person, ane or ene, which ends in n. And then you have the third person and the fourth. The fourth person. You have the first person plural and the second person plural, which are really, really similar to the terminations in the verbs. So menden, mensen. And if we go back, we see enden and enzen. So they are quite thematic, not just the consonants. And then you have anene or enene, which is basically the same thing of the third person singular with a extra ne. Also, this looks really complex, but it's really just the same sign over and over, as they are very similar. And then we have possessive pronouns, which you attach to nouns. So they go after your noun. So dingirtsu, your god, for example. And we see some, similarities between the two. Ngae, so me, I. Nga, thematic G sound. We find the G sound again in ngu. Thematic Z sound, we find the Z here, su. ane, so thematic N, and we know that it's either ani or just ni after a vowel. So ani or ni. Menden, and you just get the me. Mensen remains the same, and anene or enene becomes anene or just nene after the vowel. So they are really similar to each other. And this really concludes the lesson. I think there is nothing else. Yes, the questions as always, which you are free to, well, answer to, and then send me the solutions if you want or not. So this would be the end of the class. And as always, by the way, next 2 weeks from now, when we're going to have class again, so the 5th class, we will go back to the normal time. So not at 9 p.m. my time, but 8. So basically just standard time after the Egyptians, I think. And so because today was quite the exception. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will just fall asleep.
No, very good, very good. I mean, you said it in the homework documentation, those pronouns, the possessive show up a lot, but the regular pronouns like I, you, he, they hardly ever appear, don't they? They are like normally dropped.
Right. Yeah, I wrote it actually. I forgot to say.
Oh, yeah,
They're
it's
quite.
True.
They are for emphasis, basically. So yeah, in Sumerian, not just in Sumerian, in most languages where you have like very distinct verbal conjugation forms, like you clearly understand who is doing the action by looking at the form of the verb. So when they have different suffixes and prefixes, sometimes pronouns can be redundant. You're like, why are you repeating a pronoun? I mean, I understand like the context who is making the action. But yes, that's why I didn't spend a long time on them. I think it's just mnemonic. You kind of have to just write them down, and then whenever you see them, you just go and check your list, and you're like, okay, that's a third person singular pronoun. It's probably going to happen like twice in your whole life. It's happened like thrice to me, so they're very rare. So you can, I won't say you can forget about them, but yeah, not very important. However, these ones are the possessive ones. So they quite are. They do happen a lot. So look out for those. But again, if you learn these, then these other ones come really, really easy because again, thematic consonant, they kind of look similar to each other. Right. That, guys, I think concludes it. I'm gonna stop screen sharing.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So see you
Thanks.
guys